Hello, my name is Hakon and welcome back to my channel and a little update on my ongoing project of writing a fantasy game book. Now, it has been a while since last time I did a video on this now, and there are several reasons for that. Last time I had a little video about how I sort of done the first 100 paragraphs and was well on the way to getting started. But since then, there's been Christmas. I've spent time tidying, clearing the loft, cleaning things, doing stuff in the garage, doing some woodworking, doing some synthesizer project, and it's kept me a little bit from doing the writing. And also, there's another reason why I put it a little bit on hold, and that is because I played this. This is Victoria Hancock's Night Shift, which is one of the most highly rated contemporary game books currently available on Amazon. And I actually played this during the same week that I did my last big sort of stint of writing on my game book as well. But there are some things about this that made me rethink some of the fundamentals of my own book. And that is that this book does not use dice, it does not use ability scores, and it does not have combat. So how is it a game book, you might ask? Well, instead of those things, it has hints, clues, puzzles, and also general trivia questions. And by the last, I mean that you have some places in the book where you have to go to a paragraph based on your own general knowledge. I'm going to give you an example now. So right in the beginning, you are panicking and you're trying to open a door. This is what it says. You turn to the keypad, remembering only that the code is the first four prime numbers. And then you have the options 2357, 1235, or 1357. And that is something that you can certainly do for a contemporary setting like a Night Shift here, because the character in the book would have a similar general knowledge to the player of the book. And so it's something you can do quite successfully. Now, so the general idea of this was that I was thinking that maybe I should reduce or minimize the number of disruptive gaming elements in my book. And by disruptive, I mean things that can distract you from the flow of the narrative and from just making choices. So to me, if you are playing a game book and you meet a monster and you have to fight it, to me that is a disruptive gaming element. You actually have to take a break from reading the book to roll dice and roll dice and roll dice and keep rolling dice until you are done. And as you're rolling the dice, you don't have any narrative that goes with it. It's only whatever is in your own head, really. And so, to me, that is a disruptive gaming element. So how do you keep these things to a minimum? How do you avoid these things that can break the immersion and your identification with the character of the book as you are playing? And one of the ways to do it is to do it like Victoria Hancock's does, of course. Hints, clues, and puzzles, and, well, trivia questions. And still, this absolutely feels like a game book. So you don't need those common staples of game books for it to be a game, which is what some people think. It needs combat, or it needs abilities, or it needs dice rolls to be a game. But no, that is actually not the case. So one thing I had thought about, though, is that I can't really do that many general knowledge puzzles like there is in Night Shift, because this is a fantasy setting, and it is the character you are playing in the book is someone who is of a different culture, a different history, a different time to your contemporary player. And so your shared knowledge, or your expected general shared knowledge, wouldn't be much of an overlap. It would be quite a narrow Venn diagram, probably. So because you can't use things like prime numbers, for instance, because, well, the whole concept of prime numbers is something that you would not expect someone to have in a fantasy setting, or even just the general concepts of mathematics would be something that you shouldn't expect a character to have in a fantasy game book. But there's a lot you can do with hints and clues, and just to quickly go through that again, I do distinguish between hints and clues in game books. A clue is when you are given a piece of information that is associated usually with a number. And the reason it is associated with a number is that later you may be asked, or there may be something in the text later that gives you the indication that now you can use that piece of information, and the number is part of leading you to a paragraph that isn't otherwise mentioned in the one you're at. So, for instance, just to do an example that this has been used in fighting fantasy quite a bit as well. You find an item, it has the number 50 etched into it, and then you get to a paragraph where it is apparent that this is an item you can use, and either when you found the item, you were told to subtract or add 50 to the number of the paragraph you're on when you can use it, or in the paragraph you can use it, it says add the number on that thing to this paragraph number, and that's your next paragraph. That is a clue. A hint, on the other hand, is what I call it when you have things that are mentioned in the text that is not immediately obvious that these are things that you will need later, but they give you important little pieces of information that later, when you are confronted with a question, it is something that you actually need to know to make the right choice. And this can be really, really subtle as well. It doesn't have to be something that is directly related to the choice you're making, but if you pick up on the hint, then you will be able to make an informed choice rather than a random choice between, for instance, two different things. So, yeah. There is an example, of course, from I suppose that's not really a hint. Well, I suppose it sort of is. In Citadel of Chaos, spoiler alert, by the way, you can find a book that talks about the family history of Balthus Dyer, and it also mentions that he is allergic, as it were, to sunlight. And so later, when you get to the big boss battle with Balthus Dyer, then there is one of the options you can pick rather early on is you can pull the curtains of his room. Why would you have curtains if you can't stand sunlight, one would ask. But yes, he does have curtains and he has windows, and it is the middle of the day. So if you pull down the curtains, he gets exposed to sunlight, and that weakens him. So that is a hint that is then later picked up on, or it allows you to make a choice later that is the correct one or the best one for your situation. So hints and clues, two very important things. Puzzles, of course. This could be things that it could be quite a common way to do it, and which is also done in Night Shift. It has to do with symbols, for instance. So you might have to might get an illustration of a symbol, and there's something about that will lead you to the solution of something later. That can be a kind of a puzzle. There are many other things too that you can do. I can't think of any more sort of concrete examples, but yes, so clues, hints, and puzzles. Now, because I can't use general trivia so much in the book, I've decided to keep the dice or the die rolls. I'm just using a single 6-sided die. Now, originally, of course, I had abilities, and I had ability checks, and I had combat rolls in my book, in my initial rule set and my initial ideas for how to write it. But I was trying to go for a system that is more simplified, and also trying to break less with the flow of the narrative than fighting fantasy. So a combat, for instance, might have dice rolls, but it would also have choices. For instance, it would not be just rolling the dice. It would be choices, and you would get a narrative of the combat based on things that happen, both the choices and the dice rolls. But I also decided quite early on that all the ability scores would be fixed. There would be no variable ability scores in the beginning of the game. Everyone would start with the same abilities. And this actually leads me to quite a simple solution to how to reduce the number of ability checks. So originally, my 1d6 system of using abilities in the book would be based on the ability being a kind of a penalty or a bonus to a die roll. And then, in addition to that, you might have other bonuses or penalties depending on the situation or whether you had the correct tool, for instance. And then you would have a target number that you would try to reach. And then you would roll a die and see if you reach that target number. But then you're already doing quite a bit of mathematics. You're adding and subtracting, and potentially up to three different numbers, and seeing if you reach a target number. And already that can be quite disruptive to the flow of the narrative, regardless of how clear that is made in the text and in the rules. So, and then I realized that because as the writer of this book, I know exactly what your ability scores are at any point in the book. I will know or have ways of directing the paragraphs depending on whether you have the right tool for the job. And so you can take the ability out of the equation, or at least you can hide it from the player. You can hide the tool from the player, or just make it a choice. So, for instance, you are asked to, or you're going to try to start a fire, to build a fire for the first time. And the important thing for starting a fire in that situation is whether you have your knife or whether you've lost your knife. In the beginning of the book, that is actually not asked directly because there's something else that happens before that has already split the path. But if you imagine that you get to a situation where you are wanting to build a fire, and then you get to a paragraph that says, okay, you want to build a fire. Have you lost your knife? If so, go to paragraph this. Otherwise, go to that paragraph. Okay? And then when you get to those paragraphs, then you will have just a single die roll that directs you onwards from there again. Because you don't need to know what your ability score is, because I know what it is, and you don't need to see it. I know what your penalties and bonuses are, and I know what the target number for that roll should be to reflect the difficulty of the task. And so as a writer know all those things, then you as a reader, the only thing you need to know is what was the number you rolled on your die. So instead of all that stuff where it says test your skill against 4, you get a penalty of 2 if you've lost your knife, and all that stuff, then you can just say roll a die. If you roll 1 to 2, go to this paragraph. If you roll 3 to 6, go to that paragraph, for instance. It doesn't disrupt the flow of the narrative. It doesn't force you into thinking mathematically and potentially confusing people, because not everyone likes doing even simple maths like that. And so you disrupt the narrative, that you don't lose as much immersion potentially as you could if you have to take a break from the narrative to do complex things like that. And that I can do in my book. So I'm starting to rewrite now from the beginning. So the first 100 paragraphs are still going to remain very much the same, but I'm going to remove all that complexity from them, simplify everything, and boil it down to those the very simple mechanics that anytime there is a random event, even or something that is an ability test, it's going to be only the roll of a die for the player. Nothing else needs to be done by the player. Just roll a die and you get directed to where you need to go. So that's one thing that sort of made me sort of held me back a little bit, because I couldn't continue beyond the 100 paragraphs until I had gone back, I felt, and changed all the game mechanics of that beginning to reflect a new way of doing it. Of course, another way you can deal with bonuses and penalties to things, or the possibility of doing something, is by the use of code words. Now, I'm using some code words that will, of course, direct the course of where you go. So you do something that can affect future events. You get a code word, a 3-letter code, actually, in my book. And then in the paragraph, it says, if you have code word ABC, go to this paragraph, otherwise go to that paragraph. And of course, once that path has been split, then if there are any random events associated with whether you had that code word or not, will be incorporated into what your target numbers for that die roll are. Okay, so that's one major thing that I have been changing now, and I've been working on that. I worked on it earlier today, which is why I made this video now. I'm sort of, well, I'm not halfway through yet, but I've sort of done the first 25%, I guess, of the book. I'm quite happy with how it has been adjusted for the new reduced and simplified game mechanics. Another thing I'm trying to do at the same time, of course, is to introduce more hints, and also I'm thinking of how to introduce clues as well, to the narrative, to give you little pieces of information that will be relevant and important later on, but without your knowledge that that is the case, preferably. There are already quite a few of them. I think I've already put in at least 6 or 7 hints in the first 100 paragraphs, something like that. So yeah, so it's coming along, but there's quite a bit of a rewrite is necessary to make sure that the structure is now in accordance with my new game mechanics, which will make life a lot easier for me as I keep writing later on, and also it'll make life easier for the player when they play the book. They don't have to put the book down to roll lots of dice or to do any advanced algebra on paper to figure out what their target number is going to be with all the penalties and bonuses. So yeah. So thanks to Victoria Hancock's and Night Shift, I am making my book easier to play, I would say, and more enjoyable. Another thing about the game mechanics, once you have all the, combat and ability tests that require a bit of mathematics, is that they have to be described with in absolute unambiguous terms in the rules, and also whenever they're referenced in the text, it has to be absolutely unambiguous, 100% unambiguous, exactly what you're supposed to do. And this is actually surprisingly hard to achieve in a way that is perfect. And of course, Fighting Fantasy, famously, they don't do it right in almost any of the books. Actually, there's always, most of them have a little bit of ambiguity in the way that skill is handled, for instance. And some actually manage to do it right, but most of them it's a little bit ambiguous, and it's to do with your initial levels and your maximums and bonuses for weapons, shields, and armor. That is handled in a very clumsy way, I would say, in Fighting Fantasy. I'm not going to tell you the details of that. I've talked about that in my Fighting Fantasy videos. So was there anything else I wanted to tell you about my project now? Yeah, another thing, of course, is when I was working on the first 100 paragraphs, one thing that inevitably happens, which is a good thing, I guess, is that it jogs your imagination a little bit and it gives you ideas as you're going along. And also I've made notes of a few other ideas since I wrote those first 100 paragraphs. I've got a few other ideas to do with the religion and culture of the people, which I think is, of course, one of the most important aspects of the book, really, because it is always, regardless of what else happens in the book, it is also an expression of the world in which it is set, including the history, geography, and culture and religion of the people that you are, or the group of people that you are a member of in the book, as your character is. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say today. So simplified game mechanics are on their way, and I'll see how I get along with that as I progress. I think it's going to be rather good, and it will be so much easier once I've passed the first 100 paragraphs and tidied that up to make the rest of the book, I think, once that I've simplified it, because it's making it complex for me as well. When I write the book, having to take into account all the bonuses and penalties and all that stuff, it's a bit of a chore, I think. So boiling it down to a single die roll, so much easier. Right, I hope you enjoyed watching that, and if you're writing a game book yourself, hopefully it might have given you some little ideas for how to do things yourself. If you have any questions or comments, of course, please leave them below, and I'll see you in my next one, and thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.